Okay. Okay. Now we can start with this conversation on the new Italian book of Jason W. Moore from the New Bymington, from the University of Bymington. This is the third book of Jason with Ombre Corte publisher. The first one was World-ecology and Crisis of Capitalism in 2015, with a new edition in 2023. And the second book was Anthropocene or Capitalocene in 2017, with a translation and introduction of Emanuele Leonardi and Alessandro Barbero. And now we have our new book that in Italian is Oltre, la giustizia climatica, Verso, un'ecologia della rivoluzione, Beyond Climate Justice Toward an Ecology of Revolution. The book is a collection of 4 essays written by Jason with a preface and an introduction that written by me as in the first World Ecology and Crisis of Capitalism and in the new edition. So for the Italian audience, the book is very important because it's a critique of some concepts, and it's also a critique of the mainstream approach to climate change crisis and also to social movements based on the idea of justice. And so, for this reason, Jason, I prepared some questions for you, but all people here can obviously participate with other questions if they want. And so my first question is about the title. No, why we speak about beyond the climate justice, remembering that social movements speak about climate justice, no? And so the first question is why we need to go beyond the climate justice.
The title and the keynote essay, Beyond Climate Justice, is an homage to Martin Luther King Jr., who, when he came out against the war in Vietnam on April 4th, 1967, gave a famous speech, Beyond Vietnam. The problem of Vietnam, he said, is not poor decisions, is not a specific error. The problem of Vietnam is what he called the problem of the triple evils of imperialism, of racism, of class exploitation. And for the last year of his life, he proceeded to organize a movement and a coalition that would have brought together in that precise historical conjuncture in the United States the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, and the labor movement. He was, as we know, killed 1 year to the day after that speech, almost certainly at the hands of the American security state. It's crucial in this moment of the climate crisis to recognize, as revolutionaries in the 1960s often said, the issue is not the issue. Climate justice as a term has been appropriated by the White House, by large transnational institutions, and it has become emptied of any content, of any political meaning that would redistribute wealth and power from the super rich to the vast majority of humankind. That means that we need a vision of socialism and indeed of communism in Marx and Engels' sense as the real historical movement of the class struggle. We need a vision that integrates oppression, exploitation within the web of life. This is summarized in a slogan, a trinity, that our critique must proceed through interpretations and organizing around the climate class divide, climate apartheid, climate patriarchy, not as separate moments, but as integrated elements of an organic historical whole. That's an argument that takes on new meaning in the present conjuncture, which is, in my view, an epochal crisis of capitalism that is not reducible to the climate crisis as a biophysical event. I believe that the rhetoric of existential threat and emergency climate politics serve the interests of the rich and powerful, who are increasingly committed to resolving the biophysical challenge of climate change through worldwide green austerity, essentially solving the climate crisis on the backs and bellies and shoulders of the bottom 80% of the world's population. That is why a politics, a revolutionary politics that is premised on beyond climate justice, an anti-imperialist class struggle politics in the web of life is so crucial to making sense of capitalism's contradictions and, as Lenin would underline, its weakest links.
Jason, when you speak about web of life, in this book, you connect this concept to the concept of biotariat, or biotariato in Italian translation, because we don't have this word in Italian. It's normal because this word was coined by a poet, Stephen Collis. Collis proposing 10 years ago a definition of biotariat, saying that biotariat is I'm reading, this is the portion of existence that is enclosed as a resource by and for those who direct and benefit from the accumulation of wealth. So workers and commoners, most animals and plants, including trees and forests and grassland ecosystems, water, land, as it provisions and enables biological life. Minerals that lie beneath the surface of the land, common wastes and things too, and so oceans, atmospheres. So the enclosed and the exploited life of this planet. Can you explain us in what sense you use this concept of biotariat? Because is it important for us?
It is absolutely crucial, and I will try to explain why. First, Collis gives us the word biotariat, but he doesn't yet give us a properly Marxist concept. Yes, enclosed, but the way that the unpaid work of extrahuman life works for capitalism is not through enclosure, but through accumulation by appropriation of unpaid work. And as some people will know who are familiar with my work, I view capitalism as a system of socially necessary labor time with Marx that depends upon regimes of socially necessary unpaid work of, to quote Maria Mies, women, nature, and colonies. So for every proletarian moment, there is a biotarian moment, a femitarian moment of unpaid work performed by humans and the rest of nature. Now, this next part is very important. These are not three separate categories. This is an organic whole, as Marx liked to say. It is a rich totality of many determinations. The planetary proletariat consists of the proletariat, which in fact has always been a semi-proletariat. And that means that it is reliant on the unpaid work, feminized unpaid work of care, social reproduction, not exclusively tied to the category woman, which itself is a bourgeois fetish linked to the other bourgeois fetish, nature. These are interpenetrating, interwoven contradictions and antagonisms within the world proletariat, within the planetary proletariat. Now, why is this crucial for struggle? We have lived through a 50-year period. It is a long defeat of the world proletariat. It's not the first long defeat of the world proletariat. We can look at the conditions of the proletarian movement between roughly 1820 and 1870 to draw some important parallels. So our situation is not unique. It is not farewell to the working class, as some eco-socialists have suggested. It is a moment of the long defeat of the planetary proletariat. And the intelligentsia in the Western countries has favored an approach that emphasizes the fundamental division within the international working class, between women and men, between different racial and ethnic groups. It has emphasized those divisions as autonomous realities. This is the theory of intersectionality. The planetary proletariat thesis emphasizes that, yes, there are divisions. Yes, there is structural oppression, sexism, racism, Prometheanism, and we must identify the geohistorical origins of those ideological movements and of the labor markets that make them possible and divide the working class and teach the working class to treat its divisions by nation, race, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, etc. We must treat those efforts to fetishize differences between the working class as essentially elements of the ruling class strategy of divide and conquer. What world ecology does is not only speak to the difference in unity, the weave of oppression and exploitation within human populations, it insists that not only for the reproduction of capital, but also necessarily for the reproduction of the working class. Remember Marx, the multiplication of the proletariat is the accumulation of capital. Remember that. It insists that this process of reproduction depends also strategically on biotarian moments that can be human as well as extra-human. So we don't want to fetishize the divide between humans and the rest of nature. And we want to, at every turn, orient our ideological critique towards the imperialist ruling ideas in Marx and Engels' specific sense, the ruling ideas of man, nature, and civilization. We have slightly different terms for those in different languages and across history, but this has been an enduring set of ideological propositions that intellectuals historically have helped to reproduce, and that many so-called critical intellectuals who freely use terms like the Anthropocene reproduce. The Anthropocene is, by any historical assessment of ideology, a reactionary and imperialist concept that is not only about the description of reality, but a concrete politics of imperialism.
Also after the decision of Geological Society. Sure.
And there has been much uproar about it. The fact is that virtually everything contained within the definition of the Anthropocene was already present in the late 19th century in the definition of the Holocene.
Yes. Jason, I have another question. linked to the question of imperialism, because in this new book, the World War is present in many sentences. The war is as one of the central issue of this your new book. In my introduction, I spoke about an issue that we are facing, and also we are trying to struggle against in the universities, because with some scholars here, for example, Michele Lancione, a geographer that wrote a book in Italian about militarization of the university, because we have a great problem with military, no? For example, Leonardo, that is one of the most important producers of weapons in the world, that has strong relationships with a lot of universities. For example, in Salerno, in the University of Salerno. And in the introduction, I say that a way there is a relationship, very strong relationship between climate crisis and militarization science nexus. Okay, so we have two questions about this. The first one is about the war. What is the function of war in this, not only in the climate crisis, but in our current era, in our current moment? And the second question is about the issue of science. You, in the book, you speak about the good science, no? And you link the good science to the Malthusian moments. Okay, and so if you can you speak also about this link between good science and Malthusian moments?
Outstanding. Good science is intended for those who have not yet encountered my arguments. Good science is a critique, is a sarcastic, a sardonic commentary on how the bourgeoisie views science. And for the bourgeoisie, they want us to listen to the science, not follow the people, and then listen to scientists. So there is an ideological framing that is central, in fact, to the origins of climate science and to the post-World War II origins of Earth system science, going back to the work of J. Forrester and others after World War II. Forrester's scientific model would subsequently be used in the early 1970s to produce the limits to growth study. Forrester was, and this links the two moments, Forrester was an engineer who becomes a professor of management. And he becomes a professor of management, remember that part, at the post-war era's leading military academic institution, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. There was and is a military, industrial, academic complex. That's a term coined by Senator Fulbright. We all know the Fulbright programs. That was a term coined not by a radical, not by someone from the New Left, but from J. William Fulbright on the floor of the United States Senate in 1967 at the high point of America's chemical warfare in Vietnam. the relations of science, war, imperialism, and environmentalism, imperial environmentalism, are very, very tightly joined. The history, and we can go into more detail, but essentially part of the argument in this respect draws on the insight of Jürgen Habermas, who writes in 1968 about the tendency across the imperialist countries, Western Europe, the United States, Japan, to adopt what he calls a scientization of politics. This is what I summarize as good science. And the effort is to turn contentious and thorny questions of democracy into technocratic and scientific formulas. Of course, that last part is precisely what the Anthropocene seeks to do. And there's a longer history that goes back at a minimum to the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. Now, the question of imperialism obviously is central to all of these questions of science from the beginning. At the core of the software of empire from the 16th and 17th centuries have been techniques of knowledge and science woven into power and profit. Their job was to identify and map, secure those valuable, potentially profitable sources of human and extra-human nature. And they were very successful at it. Capitalism has always enjoyed the best science that money could buy. The question of world war is linked but distinct. I've said in this book that we are now in the middle of World War III. It should be remembered that the history of war and climate crisis from the crisis of feudalism onwards has been intimately connected. During the period of the early Little Ice Age in the 14th and 15th centuries, this was, just to give you a few signposts, the era not simply of the Anglo-French Hundred Years' War, but famously as well, the Italian 100 Years' War, the War of the City-States in the north. That tells us a lot about how climate changes that are unfavorable for agriculture set in motion political, economic, cultural crises, including war and including class revolt. This connection, this very tight connection between world war, popular revolt, and renewed imperialism comes every time the climate conditions deteriorate. It happened between 1550 and 1700. It happened between 1783 and 1820. And it's happening today. We see this as, for now, a not low intensity for the people living it, but so far a low intensity war that threatens to break out into a high intensity war. This is the US NATO war with Russia over Ukraine. It is the US warmongering in the South China Sea. It is the struggle in Western Africa. We've seen most recently Niger, which is teaching us, as I've argued, the end of cheap nature is not simply because there are depleted mines or exhausted soils. It is also because of the greatest fear of the American empire since 1945, which is that national self-determination in the global South will result in a situation where those countries use their resources and their possibilities for popular development, national development. They will consume the cheap resources that the Americans or the French or the British want. And there's no better story of that after World War II than the US installation of authoritarian military regimes across the Middle East to control the oil and therefore to control the other the American allies in Japan and Western Europe. This is a long history, but today in the present climate crisis, there is a new intensity that is, in essence, turning up the volume on the classic questions of inter-imperialist rivalry and what Lenin called wars of redivision.
Jason, the war on Gaza is not part of your book. It's not part of you.
That was after we finished.
But yes. But so listening now in this moment, I have a question about this. Do you think that the war on Gaza is part of this moment, of this historical moment characterized by the centrality of war? Do you think
I do. I think that the American-Israeli war on Gaza is a direct response to the unraveling of American unipolar hegemony in the Middle East. Hamas, which does not have politics I share, understood acutely the danger of a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That was crucial, and that's also linked to, as we know, the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered by the Chinese. We know that Saudi Arabia has recently, over the past 2 years, took a full seat on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are serious cracks and fissures opening wide in American unipolar hegemony. That doesn't mean that China and Belt and Road and the Russian-Chinese condominium is socialist, or simply because they oppose American hegemony that they are virtuous. I don't think they are. But we have to explain this as Marxists, and that means many different elements, but certainly chief among them is the extraordinary surplus capital that is now not invested in profitable, productive activities. According to Bloomberg News, $19 trillion of are invested into government securities with a 0 or negative rate of return. The drive towards militarization and the US warmongering is related to this, of course, not only to sustain the military-industrial complex, but also, as many foreign policy leaders have indicated, the possibility that after Ukraine is destroyed, American construction companies can come in. So there is this ongoing tendency towards what Bob Brenner and others call political accumulation. I would frame this more in relation to Samir Amin and a trend and a tendency towards tributary accumulation. But the spirit of the argument is very much the same. So in Israel, Israel's play is to use a political accumulation strategy in order to conduct a full-scale ethnic cleansing, reclaim Gaza, or absorb Gaza rather, and to take advantage of possible offshore oil rights in that region. It is a political accumulation strategy that has antecedents in the history of capitalism, with empires that were trapped by their limited frontiers and therefore could not prosper in the way that the greatest global superpowers could.
Jason, I have the last question that I prepared, but we are here, and if people want participate with some question commentaries, they are welcome. And the question is about how your book speak with social movements. Speak with.
Well,
why is it important, your book, for social movements strategies?
we have to know what the problem is. And this is true for every social movement. For those who are concerned with the relationship between workers, power, and the web of life, we are in a very difficult situation. We should remember that before 1970, environmentalism meant something very different from what we know it today. Environmentalism was a species of argument that I call naturalism, and its intellectual and ideological expressions were everywhere in the civilizing project, from the Spaniards all the way to the present. This is climatic determinism, environmental determinism, eugenics, and its leading figures up until 1970 and even after were people like Haeckel, who coined the term ecology, who was also, in the words of Gauss, his biographer, a proto-Nazi, in fact, who formulates a notion of Lebensraum out of his conception of ecology. And we want to keep that in mind. We want to remember when people are, so I use ecology, of course, it's not wrong, but we want to remember the intellectual and ideological history of naturalism, scientism. In the United States, environmentalism was overwhelmingly about rational resource use, and then the expulsion of indigenous peoples from what would become national parks. It was intimately connected to eugenics and continued to be intimately connected to eugenics all the way into the 1970s. So if we have ever encountered somebody like Garrett Hardin, whose Tragedy of the Commons is the most influential environmental article ever published, we should remember he was a eugenicist, a strident anti-immigrant proponent. You can draw your conclusions. These were people who were steadfastly aligned against the working classes of the world and, above all, national self-determination struggles. Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, co-authored with his wife, I should point out, was a book about the dangers of national liberation. It comes directly out of Paul Ehrlich's experience in India. Paul Ehrlich's wife, Anne, who co-authored the book, was part of an anti-immigrant group called something to the effect of the Federation of Americans for Immigration Reform. This is crucial to keep in mind when we look at the ways that environmentalism today, the post-1970 meaning of environmentalism, circulates in social movements. And the hangover of this naturalism, of what I would call a substance fetishism, is very, very strong. We see it in metabolic rift accounts, which is an account of soil fertility separated from class formation. We see this with fossil capital, where Malm inserts a lump of coal into his circuit of capital, even though Marx already reckoned with that moment of the circuit of capital. We see it in many, many aspects of movements for social justice, environmental justice. We also see movements that limit their critique to environmental racism as if that was not a class dynamic from the very beginning, as Martin Luther King said. So I want to close by reminding everyone here what Martin Luther King said at the end of his life. He said, all of the civil rights gains of the early 1960s had been done cheaply. He said they were a bargain. They didn't cost anything. For Black and white Americans to sit together at a lunch counter or to study together at a school cost nothing. What needed to happen was something that cost capital, that redistributed wealth and power from the top to the multiracial and today international working class. That jobs, housing, healthcare, safety from a toxic environment, these would all cost capital dearly. And one lesson from the past century should be clear to anyone in a social movement. If you succeed in threatening the wealth and power of the 1%, they will come for you. They will come with the courts and the police and the drones and the special forces, counterinsurgency units. The forces of capital are not playing around when we threaten their power. And their power increasingly today rests on military force. It reminds us of Luxembourg, that capital uses force as a permanent weapon. Only today, in the overwhelming crisis of accumulation and stagnation of accumulation, force maybe is becoming its only weapon.
Okay. Jason, I think that these issues, the theme of the issue of climate change and climate justice, the good science, the critic to good science, and to Malthusian, neo-Malthusian moments, the issue of war, the concept, and also the multiple actor, the biotariat, no, the web of life as a protagonist of the class struggle in the web of life and in the world ecology, and the link between war, imperialism, and ecological transformation and socio-ecological movements are, I think, the 5, 6 new issues in your book, and there is central issues in your books So I think that we have presented some of the most important questions that you analyze in this book published by Ombre, corte. We have to remember it's important because it's not simple in Italy, and it's not simple in Italy to propose this kind of book and this critique to also for social movement or social activists and socio-ecological militants and activists. Okay. I think if someone want to speak with us, I finished my questions. I studied for this interview conversation with Jason. It's possible to participate. You have to on your microphone and speak some minutes with us, and especially with Jason. Okay, please.
Hi, hello.
Tonia.
Hi. Nice to meet you both.
Very good.
I think I know the teacher, the professor Avallone from uni from many years ago, but it's an honor for me to be here and to join you. I've been studying a bit the climate change issues, and it has been my interest since 20 years, I guess.
Me too.
It's so interesting, your view and your analysis. For example, your perspective, it's so interesting. I would say Marx was really early in understanding the way of also, nature was going to lose a lot with the capitalism. A question after all your theories and concepts that is really important for me is to understand the role of freedom for the individual, how the individual and the planet can free himself from this injustice?
Well, I'm with Marx and Engels.
Yeah.
I'm with Marx and Engels that the transcendence, the freedom of the individual rests upon the abolition of classes. Now, if your question is about how do we pursue that, we can have that conversation, but we should ground those conversations within a historical context. My interpretation of individual freedom in so-called, what used to be called advanced capitalism, I don't like that, the imperialist centers, is that much of it was a performance, much of it was theatrical. I stand with Marcuse in identifying the totalitarian tendencies of, in his words, advanced industrial capitalism. I think those have only intensified across the moment of capitalism's neoliberal degradation and degeneracy.
Yeah, but in such a global society and such a difference between all countries and all divide on way the individual is important in the nation and in the transnations, how we can talk about social movement if there are still many differences, and to transform in practice some theories, how can this be possible?
Well, we have a wonderful, brilliant example of this after World War II, of national liberation struggles of various hues of bourgeois nationalism, working class, and communist nationalism, in which the priorities were very much as Samir Amin talks about in his concept, his grossly misunderstood concept of delinking, which is popular mobilization around national priorities, the securing of healthcare, of basic housing, of infrastructure, especially the liberation of women, of many of the formation of multiracial, multinational federations. Of course, there were many problems because there is one group in capitalism that is absolutely certain that socialism works, and that's the bourgeoisie. So these efforts were always hobbled and undermined from the very beginning by counterinsurgency and chemical warfare and all-out warfare, as the Vietnamese discovered. They are still paying the price. And so when we talk about the individual, we should take special care not to take the bourgeois fetish of the individual, but not, that means to recognize it as one-sided. It has maybe certain elements that should be carried forth in revolutionary struggle. But I would say if you wanted freedom as an individual and you lived in the old colonial world, the new third world, then you were much better off to live in, say, Cuba after 1959 than, say, in Indonesia after 1965, or Vietnam, southern Vietnam, where individuals had absolutely no right to anything. So I think that's the concrete struggle must proceed by following, in my view, some creative adaptation in the era of climate crisis and capitalism's ethical crisis, Samir Amin's notion of delinking, which again is not autarky, but the popular mobilization around new national priorities to guarantee basic human needs and to move forward on that basis.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have other questions or commentaries for Jason or not? No.
If I can, do you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, good morning, Dr. Jason. I have just one question. I began my environmental learning many years ago in the early 90s with the eco-Marxism of James O'Connor. Maybe do you remember? His journal was Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, and was translated also in Italian by the newspaper Il Manifesto. Also influencing the debate at that time. As you remember, there was the debate produced by the Rio conference, but the effects of the Rio conference have been diminished by the enormous development produced by globalization in the 90s, particularly with the commodity super cycle, or maybe the right expression is raw materials super cycle, especially for the countries of the global south. So this because in the recent year, my readings have shifted to Bruno Latour to understand better how to contemplate the environment questions concerning the possibility that to understand the question of the environment in a different way. But we are facing today a kind of a trial to science with the position of the not only of the person who deny the human effects on climate, as happened, for example, with the Quaternary Stratigraphy Commission of the which refusal to proposal to create an Anthropocene epoch. There is also a conflict, somewhat about the clash between those who support the reason for war and pacifists. I mean, in my opinion, the discourses concerning the reasons for the use of military force are produced by denying, in fact, the policies of sustainability. But these discourses are produced by the same people who use the issue of sustainability for environmental conversion. See, so my question is this, and I'm finishing. The issue of sustainability not only is felt by with different degrees between global north and south, but I see the risk that in the future wars may be declared precisely because of environmental issues. I mean, for example, for the question of the people of global south who refuse to meet their targets to reduce emissions for hydrocarbons, for example, or for the problem of the development issues for the factory, etc. So that was my question. Sorry for I was very okay.
So what is the significance, importance of sustainability as a politics for the climate crisis? Do I understand, Emiliano?
Yes, I mean, the problem of the sustainability, I mean, I see the risk of using the sustainability issues as a way to pressure the global south. Yes. Even that is my question.
You are precisely correct. This has been the problem and the issue since 1972. And in fact, the conversations building up to the Stockholm Conference and then the Stockholm Conference itself, which gives rise to the UN Environmental Program and to adding a crucial global moment to what I call the eco-industrial complex of green parties, of academic programs, the foundations, the nonprofit foundations of the billionaire class, and so on and so forth. So sustainability has been, since then, an imperialist politics that seeks to impose degrowth in a kind of green austerity and imperialist way on the South. And underneath all of this, and I want to emphasize this point, maybe more than any other, is that for sustainability, for Anthropocene, for what Martinez Allier once called the environmentalism of the rich, there is a pure and profound hatred of the working classes of the world, and a pure and profound skepticism towards democracy as the solution. That from the sustainability architecture, and today, as Emiliano, you underscore, this has been supported and buttressed by the World Economic Forum and a whole web of transnational institutions, the Club of Rome, the Trilateralists, the UN Environmental Program, many other institutions. What they want is a techno-scientific approach to resolve the climate crisis on the backs of the global south and the working classes of the global north. So you are 100% correct.
Thank you very much.
Jason, we can stop here.
If there are more questions, I'm fine,
no.
but
If
I am
we
also
have other
fine.
questions and commentaries, we are here. But if not, we can stop here. Also because I have to put subtitles in this.
You have to
video.
make dinner. For me, it's the middle of the day, and we are talking about very important, very interesting topics. So thank
Okay,
you. This has been an honor.
Arslan. There is Arslan now. Arslan Ashgar
Okay.
from Pakistan.
Perfect.
Good morning, Sir Jason Mori, and good evening for Gennaro, Sir Gennaro. Thank you so much. I didn't read your masterpiece yet, and I will read this book with the guidelines of my professor, Gennaro. Here I have a question, but I don't think it's a question, it's a point in my mind. Sorry about my introduction. I am Arslan Askar from Pakistan, and I am here a PhD student under the supervision of Professor Gennaro Avallone. My point is that if we talk about the sustainability and environmentalism of some nations of the world, why they use the unipolar hegemony and political accommodation strategy, and why they don't come towards the communism? Why, when we will be at the point of communism, a lot of 1,000 millions of books, millions of waves talk about the communism, and I am from my school. From my school, I have been learning about the communism. There will be a communism, and all of the nation, all of the world will be equal, and there will be no power distribution, and there will be no levels of the power. And my point is that I want to come to a conclusion that can we gain the communism?
So for a Marxist, we call the philosophy historical materialism. That means we begin with the history, not in the sense of a professional historian, but in the sense of a Marxist who weaves together the elements of human life as social and natural. Marx and Engels, in fact, say this explicitly in the German ideology, a text that most Marxists never read, and if they do, they don't take it seriously. So in the German ideology, they are articulating a labor theory of metabolism, that is a theory of class struggle in the web of life. It is not, of course, destiny. It is not a teleology. Communism is not a certainty. It is, as they say, not a vision to which we must adjust ourselves, but the real movement, their words, of the class struggle in capitalism's world historical transformations. Most of that, which I have just said, is completely foreign to, let me say, 80 or 90% of people who call themselves Marxists. So if we take your question seriously, which we should, then we should go and look at the relations between dramatic climate changes and changes in class structure. And one pattern clearly emerges that I will summarize this way, that unfavorable climate changes over the past 2,000 years have been very bad for ruling classes. This goes to the crisis of the Roman West in the 5th century, which was also what climate science historians call the Dark Ages cold period. It was true for the crisis of feudalism at the dawn of the Little Ice Age. It was true for capitalism, which through the genocides of the New World created the first capital-ogenic, made by capital, the first capital-ogenic climate crisis between 1550 and 1700. This continues time and time again. So there are moments of very unfavorable climate change that are profound hardships for the vast majority. But they are also politically destabilizing for ruling classes. That is my way of saying, if we take seriously Lenin's aphorism that we must search for the weak links in the imperialist chain, that chain is not purely a social chain. It is irreducibly about imperialism and class struggle in the web of life, about capital accumulation in the web of life. And of course, sustainability is a form of counterinsurgency, ideologically speaking. In fact, much of the sustainability infrastructure grows out of an earlier move by the United States after World War II to impose or practice the cultural Cold War. And you in Italy know this very well. This was an effort to keep the Italian Communist Party out of the government and to build a so-called non-communist left. Well, this is the world historical function of sustainability from 1972 to the present. Wonderful question.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, Jason. Valentina, thank you very much and goodbye. Ciao, Valentina. Ciao. Valentina is a professor here in our university in Salerno. Okay, Jason. I think we can stop here if you agree. If okay, everyone. Okay, perfetto. It's okay. So many thanks. I remember the title of the book, Oltre, la giustizia climatica, verso una rivoluzione ecologica. Eccolo lì, il libro. E l'altro è The Other is the second edition of World-ecology and Capitalism, published by Ombre, corte. Gianfranco Morosato is Ombre, corte. Okay, Jason, many thanks, and I send you the link to our video, no? Our video, and okay. And I remember that. And I remember you that Jason will be with Jason we have a new meeting on 5 April, a seminar in a series of 5 seminars on political ecology of migration. If someone is interested in it, can send me an email for more information. Okay, this is.
And Arsalan asked if there are English essays. Yes, you can go to my website at jasonwmore.com. You can find it. Yes,
and you can find a part of the essays of this book. Not all essays. Okay, Jason, very thanks for this meeting and for this 1 hour conversation. It's sufficient to present this book to especially to the Italian audience. And many thanks.
It's been a true
Grazie,
pleasure.
veramente.
Thank you,
Grazie,
Jason.
grazie.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Gianfranco.
Ciao, arrivederci. Ciao, 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 ciao. Grazie a tutte quante, grazie a tutti. Grazie a tutti, a tutti. A presto. Ciao, ciao. Ciao Gianfranco.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, 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 ciao. Arianna, arrivederci.